while I was there, I met a fellow named Carl who he had some money and an adventuresome spirit, and he wanted to buy a sailboat and go sailing, and invited me to join him on that adventure. The fellow who Carl bought the boat from, his name is Gerard DeWitt. He was building a 54-foot ketch on speculation at a boatyard on the Miami River. And Gerard had designed a 30-foot ketch that he had intended to be easy to build, economical, and perfect for cruising. There was a spot right behind the boat that he was building in the boatyard, and he would be there. So I decided I would take on this project of building this 30-foot ketch so that I could go sailing on my own. And he would be there, even though I had never built a boat before, he would be there kind of overseeing and guiding me, being my mentor through the project. The inspiration for the design was the boat that Gerard had been living on, which was called Autant. The designer was William Hand, who was known for motor sailors. This was not a motor sailor, this was a gaff-headed ketch. But it was built using the strip planking technique, and that's what Gerard specified for his design, thinking that it would be easier for an inexperienced guy like me to build a hull using strip planking rather than the more conventional type of wide planks that you have to deal with. I built bulkheads first to get the shape of the boat, so that the planks were following the contour of the bulkheads. But there were no frames in the traditional sense where you would have a frame every 2 feet or so. It was just the bulkhead. I didn't do any steaming, but I was right on the Miami River, so I would bundle up some 2x2s, drop them into the river overnight, and then the next day I would pull them out, and they would be not quite as flexible as you might like them to be, but it worked. So the Pioneer Marine School operated out of an old ferry boat that was docked on Pier 15. It was called the Heart, ferry boat Heart. And the schooner Pioneer was part of the school program. So David met me down in Florida. He was staying on a houseboat on the Miami River, coincidentally right next to where I was docked, and asked me to come up to see about a job at South Street. So I flew up there, saw what was going on, and they agreed to hire me. So I sailed my boat from Miami up to South Street Seaport and docked it at Pier 15 and went to work for Pioneer Marine School, where I taught boat carpentry and seamanship. Now, this was when the seaport was still the South Street Seaport Museum.
Right.
You know, it was before the Rouse
Corporation came in,
before
right?
they
Yes.
came in and made it more of a Disneyland kind of a thing. It was still an authentic museum and attracted some wonderful people who were really serious about restoration and boats and history. To start from nothing and create something that you can then live in and sail around on and sail up to New York on and do all these things with, and it's beautiful to look at. It's enormously satisfying, and you can't help but develop some self-confidence, from having done that.
Our goal is to have a not-for-profit agency that will provide boat building experiences for kids so that we can continue to build period boats, representative of the area. Over the years, we started out 2010. The first group was 2009, so we had 8 kids working there. And I think we had 10 or 12 kids in the second big group. This year we had 16. And so more kids have progressed. Some kids have come back last week. Some kids knocked on the door. They're on the way home. Said, "Hi, how you doing?" And they came in and said, "Look, at your boat's finished, the one you started." And they were, beaming. They were really happy to see that the boat was done. The Youth Bureau has been very, very supportive. They're actually our mother agency, so we're working with the city through them. We've built 6 boats so far, and we're embarking with the middle school kids now in our second season with them on their after-school program. 6th to 8th graders who are working on a 12-foot sailboat. And this sailboat, they had to make from the boat itself, the hull all the way up through the mast and the sails. So we discussed the history not only of how we make the boat, but the history of that boat and why it's named that and where it was used and so forth. Yeah, the interesting thing about it is not only are they working with hand tools and some power tools, but they have a lot of math to do as far as taking angles and measurements and so forth. And it's evolved into a program where we're teaching mathematics through building boats. Developmentally for young people, they get the skills of working with tools, having the pride in build something that they've built and so forth. And it could lead into career options for people. But it's also an artistic venture too, that they can see that they've done something that's really pretty and it actually works and is utilitarian. Because these boats are very attractive. 99% of the kids have not had any experience working with hand tools. I mean, tell them to go get a certain type of saw and they say, or a screwdriver, they want to use it for something else. You have to use a chisel. So that's where we're going from. It's more of not producing boats for the sake of profit, but producing boats for the benefit of young people.
One of the most vivid memories of the place was the joiner shop, the big main building. The building had many incarnations, and one of the fun things about the building, when I came there at age 21. That's when George Young hired me. George Young, and he needed a helper with woodwork, and for me it was a beautiful place because there were all these old timers kicking around, and of course they were old timers at that time. They were my age now, but they were old timers for me because I was 20.
Yeah, that's what happens.
That's the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
And but there was so much talent at that yard, and the main building. There was a room on the ground floor called the mill, and the mill was below the joiner shop, and as I understand it, that's where the heavy, rough dimensioning machines were. And a truck would come in, and you guys would take stuff into the mill and rough it down, get it dimensioned, get it cut up. And there was still, at the time I was there, a huge planer in the back. It looked like a stone crusher. It was so big.
Yeah.
Then above that was the joiner shop. And the joiner shop was great. It was the last, you can't say original in a yard that goes back to the Dutch. You can't say original, and that's actually the hopeful part of the story. But for, the machines in the joiner shop were beginning of the 1900s, World War I and World War II machines.
Sure.
And it was a shop that was set up to handle like 20 or 30 guys. And so they had these big benches. They were wide enough for 2 men to work on opposite sides. And then these fantastic machines. And the shop was laid out so beautifully so that long pieces of stock could be run through. The joiner was set up off axis with the double drum sander, off axis with the planer.
Sure.
And there were windows strategically placed, so if you had a really long piece of stock, you could stick it out the window and run it. And it was just a fantastic shop, and the benches had seen so many hand hours. I mean, patina doesn't serve. at all. It was a fantastic shop. It was the place where you would go, where you sensed that 300-man staff, and everything else had changed, and that's the nature of a yard. It changes to suit the job. But somehow the joiner shop had survived, and one of the things that I thought about in that time when it was so difficult was that, of course, my generation, we would go in the shop and say, "Oh, look at these old beautiful machines. These machines are 100 years old or 90 years old." And in a yard that's been around for 300 years, there's been lots of old machines come and go.
Yeah.
Those were
Late
new
edition.
machines,
Right.
as far as Peterson's Boatyard was concerned. Those were new machines. And I thought to myself, and this is why we fought, to keep it a working yard. This was what drove me, aside from my commitment to Mr. Carl to look after the place, was that if you kept it going 100 years from now, there'd be some young guy, 20, 21 years old, working at that property, just loving it like I did, and looking at the old machines that were bought now, maybe, and saying, "Oh, look at these great old machines." And so that was what was the true romance of the place, that it transcended all these men and all these workers. There were all these stories, all these lives made and incomes made and families supported by that piece of property, and it was just essential to keep it going. It was essential to keep it going. And now, so now Kenny, who runs the place, has got commercial vessels, and he does steel boat fabrication.
I was born over in Croton Point in January the 7th, 1903. So that makes me a pretty old goat, huh?
I used to go down and watch this old gentleman mend his nets, and I used to watch them in the evening when they were going out. Of course, it was all oars, your road then. There wasn't no motors that I ever knew about. And I used to see them going on at just about sundown, going out to fish for the evening. And I used to say, "Gee, I would like to go."
When I first started, I started fishing out of Croton River, fishing outside here, but I used to come down the Croton River and set the nets out here in the Hudson. Then in 1926, I came down to this place here, and that's when we had the old Shannemark Boat Club house, and which was our headquarters. Well, let's see. I guess there's not much to see here. This is the latest boat that I built, a rowboat. That's made out of plywood. And there's one of the older boats, which is a little bit larger and still not one of the real big fish boats. That one was probably 17 feet. And this one is about 16 feet, but they're built entirely different. This one over here would be wider and actually would carry more. This was just a little boat that I stuck together. It's not anything that I use for fishing. My other boats were all bigger. They were 20-footers, and they were capable of carrying 5,000 pounds. Don't get me wrong though, because I've built a few boats, but as I say, like I told them down to the South Street Seaport, the lady that I went down with, they built some boats down there in one of the buildings, and she went over and she wanted me to come over there and meet these people. So I she told him that she had a boat builder. So I went over there. So they said, "You're the boat builder." "No, sir." I said, "I'm not a boat builder." I said, "I'm a fisherman, that's all. And not much of a one at that now." So then I started asking them some questions about the boat they had under construction. And I asked them, I spoke about the ribs that they were using, and what they used for the rails. And I guess when I got through asking him, he says, "Do you mind if we contradict something that you said?" I said, "Not at all." I said, "People have been doing it for years." He says, "You said that you were not a boat builder." I says, "Yes, sir." That's it. Well, he says, "Allow me to contradict you." He says, "You are a boat builder." Oh. I said, "That's news to me."
I was just upstairs. There's a picture of some guy with this sturgeon about this.
Oh, yeah, that's a friend of mine, Tucker Crawford.
Is he?
And that boat I built over 50 years ago.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. I have often weighed out of that boat over 5,000 pounds of fish.
That boat's still around?
No, I guess it's gone now.
How about Tucker?
Oh, he's still there.
Is he?
Yeah. He's crazy as ever. He can outline me, and you know he's got to be good.
I started kayaking in the early 80s. A friend of mine lived in Dobbs Ferry right on the river, and I moved here in 1980 up on Warburton. Basically, the river beckoned, and I got boats, got involved with kayaking, and I've been paddling since then. But 1997, 98, I was out paddling on the Sound, and ended up going to this touring kayak club. And there was a guy there, Phil Malusi, who had handmade a kayak. He's now the Commodore there. And it was the coolest thing. So the next year, fortunately, we had a chance to build boats at the back of the old BZAC Environmental Education Center in the Quonset Huts. So me and a friend, Gene Cawley, built stitching blue plywood boat. I had built a couple other boats here and there, and that sort of got us stuck. And then a few years later, we got a chance from the city to set up a boat building shop. It was at the I-Park when they were refurbishing it. We ran that 4 or 5 years. We ran the classes there. Then the block grant ended. Money was getting tighter. We didn't bother trying to get another grant. But then a few years after that, Ron Cabriello, who just retired, wanted to develop Kennedy and do some things up here. And one of the things was this area underneath the roadway. So, he said basically, we're going to finish it off and we'll let you guys do what you want. So we said, put it in the shop, and we've got boat storage next. It does two things. It lets me share, which is really nice. But at the same time, I get a shop I can work in. This year, we're also involving some more alumni in helping out run nights. Putting out about 6 to 8, 9 boats a year, that comes to a fair amount. We work with this, it's all pegged and lashed, it's not temperature dependent. So it's fine. I mean, the native people built boats under really harsh conditions. We've had winters where you couldn't feel your fingers, and you're shoveling out 3 feet of snow to get in. And I've sort of had this insidious plan to populate the ranks of kayakers with Bidarka. You don't see them very much on the East Coast. Well, basically, it goes down to traditional boats that native people use to hunt. There's 2 basic, more popular ones, and that's in Greenland, just the Greenland hunting kayak, and then the Bidarka, which was the Aleut, Pacific Northwest. Diminutive of Bidar, which is boat, so it means like small boat. Ikiax, I-Q-Y-A-X, would be the Aleut term for it. Kayak is actually Greenlandic, Q-H-A-A-Q, kayak. So that's what they call their boats, And those are 2 completely separate cultures, but they both developed hunting boats. They didn't have much to work with, but they came up with good designs that suited their hunting style. So what happened with the Bidarkas and the Aleut, Aleutian Islands, from my understanding of this, is they didn't so much, like the Greenlanders would just get in the boat, go out, find a place where some seals, hunt, and come back, whereas the Aleut sometimes made trips, do hunting trips and stuff, to go somewhere, then hunt, butcher, then come back. So they had more open water crossings. Greenland boats had to have a big overhang in front so they could run up on the ice. With the Aleut boats, because they're doing a lot of open water, they have the bifurcated bow. So what happens is, you're coming downwind, right? You start surfing, The traditional boats were made with hinged keels, so the boat actually could flex. So what that meant is that you have a very fine waterline entry. And you got reserve buoyancy, so as soon as the bow starts going in, it lifts and rides up, which means the boat is a lot more efficient. You're not causing a lot of drag, and they really could get going fast. And when they had the hinges, they would actually put like abalone shell or something like for bearings. Yeah, they were pretty good engineers. When you're making a traditional boat, you make the deck first, you decide how wide it's going to be, you make a little support to hold it at that width. You have to make a lot of decisions. The thing I like about it is there's a bunch of different designs, but the procedures are all the same. So you can have people building different boats, but everybody's doing the same thing. I have made variations in the design. I've moved frames around. What I'll do is, let's say I want this frame there, I'll make a fake one out of cheap plywood, put it in and just cable tie it in. Then I can make measurements and figure out, I'll make a comp, figure out what goes in here, then install. So I've done that, if I want to change position. Because I like to bring the cockpit back a little bit to trim the boat a little differently based on experience. So it's a challenge in running the shop is to make sure we have all the materials when we need them. I usually don't buy things until right away. Well, I always overbuy too, so we've got a little left over, so that extends the period. So we'll come back here with a $600 worth of plywood and pine and spend like 2 days ripping it all, because the chimes are 3/4 by 3/4, the keels are 3/4 by like 7/8, and we go to about 1 1/4 on the gunnel, so we've got to make sets of everything.
The number of students who have any kind of experience with tools is probably maybe 1 or 2 every few semesters. Most of them come in without any experience at all. So pretty much within the first week of the program is just really about introducing them to the tools and shop safety and just going through every basic tool we have here and giving a demonstration on what it's for, how it's used, and reinforcing how to safely use it. So much of what we think about here every day is about the way that we're helping to build the kids, and we're trying to formalize some of the skills that they're actually getting to say, well, no matter what, we also are doing these skills. And one of the things that we're really a big focus is if you're trying to get a plank out for a boat, just the process of having a curved line that you have to make and then rough that out and then take that to the bench and use a hand plane to take that down to the line and square that up, use a combination square. That process right there is probably one of the biggest things. Tools such as even the table saw, the adjustments are basically made to just tune up the machine every once in a while, but then you're just raising and lowering the blade and setting the width, and that's about it. But with a hand plane, that it takes several years before the kids really get comfortable doing that. Just even learning how to sharpen it, that's where I think that you can use a table saw all day, and it's not any different if you're running a piece of wood through it or running a piece of plexiglass through it. It just smells different. But with a hand plane, that's where you discover wood grain and you see that it's irregular and that you can't adjust the hand plane and go. You have to fine tune it, you have to make it more aggressive, you have to skew it, you have to do all these little finicky things to it to get the sense of the material that you're working with. So yeah, exactly the same way with a chisel. If you're using a chisel, a lot of times you're doing something that there's not really an equivalent machine way to do it. When you cut a stem rabbet, it is a constantly changing bevel. It'd be such a complicated machine. Just the jig that you'd have to make to do the rotating, it's fairly complex. Within building a wooden boat, there's correct changes for every boat you build, every process you do, but there is kind of a correct to the boat. And that's all about just the way the shape looks. And there's just such an artistic element that you're working with to try to make things look good and to try to make shapes fair and smooth and have good curvature. That is also one of the things too that is sort of teaching that skill and to teach that to the young people who are here. to be able to just look at things and to be able to pick out an irregularity, be able to pick out where something needs to be pushed out or pulled in or something like that. And because it's not something that can be defined with having a flat surface, and having the table is flat the whole way across. Every piece that you put on the boat is going to be a curve pretty much, so it comes into play with everything that you're doing. It definitely is something really useful and something to help be able to see when a lot of the joinery that's happening, to see that it needs to look good, it needs to have some kind of shape, and it needs to come in at a certain angle that's dictated by the whole rest of the shape, but then it needs to fit into something sort of precisely. Within boat building, so much of that carpentry and those joints are really tough to see. One of the things I think that's interesting within boats is being able to just work towards something that you can't necessarily imagine 100% in your head, like this is going to be like this, that you have to start doing it and you have to start sort of removing material a little bit to even get it to where you're beginning to see like, oh, okay, I can see how this angle is going to need to reflect what's there. Working in that as a medium, you have to become attuned to the process that way, that it's not going to be straightforward, it's not going to be something that you can describe, and that's the way it is. And the great thing within the apprentice program is being able to work with the kids on an advanced level where you can go and say, like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to achieve, and some of the things you're going to have to watch out for are the way that this feels, the way that the wood's going to react to doing this, and you have to just focus and kind of get into that process. It's not something that I can say, you do it like this. So you have to really become kind of attuned to it.
I started out as a fitter turner machinist, halfway up the west coast of the South Island, New Zealand, between Westport and Hokitika. We refitted trawlers from 40 to 80 feet long. And I started refitting trawlers, or helping refit them, when I was 16. I worked for that company for nearly 10 years, and I was a leading hand in the machine shop as well. Anything they needed, modifications on the deck equipment, hydraulic equipment, all that. And haul outs and survey work, checking the props and shafts. And then I went on to welding, a lot of welding and gold mining work. I used to do repair work on gold mines. I worked at that for 10 years too. I had a friend who was an engineer on a deep sea fishing trawler. He offered me a job for a season doing squid work, catching squid, about 150 miles south of New Zealand. Keeping the boat running. It was a small factory trawler, so we would catch the squid and then we'd put it into trays in the plate freezers, and then freeze and pack it and put it in boxes, and then we'd bring it back to the port for it. And then had a change in my life at the end of that, after I'd done that, and my friend, he went to Greece and started doing sailing holidays, on skipper charters on boats and doing flotilla holidays, and he invited me over he said, I'll come over for a month and work with me in the Mediterranean. Yeah. So I did, and I ended up staying there for 2 years. Beautiful. I enjoyed it. That's actually how I ended up here, because I met my wife over there. She was from New Jersey. I ended up working as a skipper on flotilla holidays, and she was one of my clients. And we met, and I ended up here. And that's how I really got passionate about fixing sailboats. And I was sailing every day at my work and teaching people how to sail and about boats and all that sort of stuff. So that's how really I fell in love with it again. I really fell in love with it then. That's why I do it now. So when I came to America here, 96, guys that went to Greece, my wife had a little boat at Nike Boat Club, and they asked me to come up to help them unstep the mast. So I came up here and I walked into Peterson's at that time, and John Lipscomb was the manager. The old building was still here. All the old machinery was still upstairs. Very different place than what it is today. And got belt-driven equipment and some heavy-duty sanders and planers, and nice old shop. So I started working here on the hauling crew. I didn't really tell him what else I could do at the time, and then he found out that I could weld and I could fix engines, and so I became a mechanic, and then I became the yard foreman for 5 years, and then I decided, well, I always wanted to try and work for myself, and I became a subcontractor. That's when I started to pick up all the wooden boat work that they used to have. Nobody could do it, so I started doing it for them, the repairs and any woodwork that needed to be done, I took it on for them. Because that's where I saw the opportunity, because we couldn't find anybody. Now I do the sailboat rigging and some work that I bring in from other places myself, and I bring it here to get it done. And whatever they need sailboat-wise, I do for them. Other electronic work, things like that. I do most things on a boat, just about everything. The boat was originally built, I'm not 100% sure, it looked like ash to me. It was really weird wood, the battens behind the planks, and they were rotting out. It wouldn't hold a screw anymore on a lot of the wood. Previously I'd done the other side of the boat. I'd put probably about 8 or 9 planks on the other side and replaced some rotten frames on that side. And when I was doing that, I noticed that there was rot on the other side, but the owner didn't want to do anything about it at the time. So we repaired the boat and I refinished it. It sat on the lift for 2 years, and then he came to me and said, well, I noticed that the butt blocks are starting to break out and the plugs are falling out. You know, I gave him the estimate to fix the 3 planks that were there and the frames, because I couldn't get behind it because of the fuel tank was in place. And as soon as I took those 3 frames off, I found all this other stuff, and then I found the transom was rotting off it. Well, I removed all the damaged wood and then started rebuilding the frames from that side. But I replaced everything with white oak and epoxied all the battens back onto the frames, replaced a bunch of frames, and then I replanked the boat halfway down the port side to the transom, and then put a complete new transom on it. In the end, I scraped out all the caulking from the deck, recorked the deck, and pinstriped it and varnished it. Then I carved the name in the back, finished it, sign read it, and painted the whole thing. I was happy with the way it came out. It was a major undertaking because it was a lot of work to get all the rotted frame ends out without taking the whole boat apart and maintaining the shape of the boat.
One of my ex-partners and I, we were kids together. We built a boat in his garage, 20 foot, 21 foot, and we used it on the Hudson River. Matter of fact, we used to drive under the Tappan Zee Bridge when they were building the Tappan Zee Bridge, and we used to give them the finger and they'd throw river at us. That's what we did with our boat. And I started here in 59, it was 57. I spent 2 years down there. And Tobin Craft was the company. My family had invested in this corporation, Tobin Craft Incorporated. Actually, we went public. Most of the tricks, what do you call it, the sub-skills, I learned from an old gentleman down in Jersey that just somehow took a liking to me. And he said, Artie, you really take into this. Can I work with you and show you what I know? I said, sure. And what we did down there, and we took away everybody's ruler. And we made templates. And everything was templated. All you did was lay it on, cut it out, and put it on. I said, get rid of the stupids. That's what I used to say. And some of them, I remember them, what he used to call them, this is the bird's mouth, and there's your stop water. When you're building a keel, and the stem come down, you put it in, and you mount the keel to the stem. There's a brace in there, and you have to cut that bird's mouth just perfect so that fits in. You have to drill a hole through the joint, put a wooden plug in there, a wooden dowel, and that's what's called a stop water. So when the stem would move, that stopped, the water couldn't go up around it and had to go out. That was one of the things I remember from him. Well, I was looking for a place in the area. I lived in Yonkers. And I said, okay, let's find a place up here. So I found a place. It was in Dobbs Ferry. I found a place in Dobbs Ferry. And we made arrangements to buy the property. I got a hold of the New York Central, and we made arrangements with New York Central to move the station and put up a marina and boat building place. We had the backing, and at the last minute, Dobbs Ferry said no. Find someplace else, and come up and we found this place. I got into this place here, and then after that it was just 7 days a week. Because this building here was a seaplane hangar, and it had a truss roof, and it burned down. So what we did was I raised the piers and made a 14-foot ceiling because I needed that height to put the jig down. So we put these beams up and put the roof on. Matter of fact, I put these beams up with I think it was a 1949 Chevrolet and a gym pole, when I had a 4-part pull. And we solved that problem. We got a roof and we started to build boats. This was what we call a trunk cabin. This was a bigger one. It was the same size hull, but it was different inside. It had a galley in it. You see, this is before I even put the walls up. One of my slides, steam bed frames. There was a jig that I made that came down off the ceiling right here. Came down off the ceiling, a strong back, and it planked to the frame. You took the jig out and you put these the ribs in. We call them ribs. I only made 2 models. I made one without a hard top and one with a hard, and I made only 3 or 4 of the ones what they call a cabin cruiser. Made everything out of mahogany. See, with the mahogany, you had to put them in and you had to soak them, so they would seal and soak them, and the wood would swell and they wouldn't leak. This is the boat. This is what you see right here. There's the boat, the hull being framed, and there's the plank. Then it went from there to here. And this is where we put the motor beds in and the engine in and the forward deck on. This is where we started to finish it off. This is my brother. That's the Long Island Marathon boat. And we won it. This is my driver. This is his crew. This is my brother. I think this is a salesman that I had working for us. That's the shop. So we had, I put an auxiliary tank on. I think they had to stop for fuel once. It's 150 miles around Long Island. There's a picture of them from the Long Island Marathon. All I did was build a boat and test it. It worked. They got out from under. That's me testing it. You recognize the hat.